Welcome to A Slice of SEL, a podcast for educators about social emotional learning.
Welcome to A Slice of SEL. We're the SEL services team at the St. Croix River Education District. I'm Nick.
I'm Rye.
And I'm Courtney.
This week, we're talking about PreCorrection Prompts, sometimes called preventive prompts. This is when we're making some type of transition during class, like we're about to start discussion, about to watch a video, about to break into small groups, about to start using Chromebooks. You get the idea. And we cue students about a behavior expectation that's going to be particularly important for whatever activity we're transitioning to. We're talking about this because with students spending more and more time back in school buildings, we're taking the opportunity to chat about some classroom management fundamentals that get us a lot of bang for our buck. And this is definitely a high impact, easy to use strategy that fits that bill. Last week, we talked about classroom rules, and pre-correction is really the next logical step. You could say it's the primary tool that we use day to day to make those rules actually work for us and our students. And I mentioned it last week. I am so excited to be on this topic and be spreading the gospel of pre-correction because personally I felt its value firsthand so many times. And I spent the last 3 years working in a separate school building only for special education students with the greatest behavior needs. So taking a lot of students from different schools whose behaviors were too disruptive or dangerous to be appropriately managed in those resident schools. And then we put all those students together into one small school. And even though we were dealing with smaller class sizes, you don't really have super appropriate positive peer role models. And it could feel like every classroom you're stepping into is like a tinderbox because there's so much potential for disruptive behavior happening at any moment. So behavior was our number one challenge and our number one priority. And as a staff, we talked about pre-correction so much as this was a super important habit that we needed to build and maintain in each other. We needed to be on it and just use pre-correction all the time. And just to be clear, I'm not perfect. I'm not saying the classes that I led were perfect and they always went perfectly, but I can tell you that pre-correction really flippin' helps. And when I had a tough period or a tough string of periods with a class, one of the first things I'd reflect on is, am I doing enough pre-correction? Can I do better with pre-correction? Because it is that important. So that's why I'm so excited for this episode today.
Calm down, Nick. We can't get too excited. We have to talk about our buckets. So before we dive into pre-correction, let's get back to our regular segment, what's filling our buckets. I'll go first, per usual. The weather, it's been a hot minute since I talked about the weather, so I'm going to bring it back around. I drove to a couple districts this week, and it was so sunny, and I didn't wear a jacket, and I heard snow melting, and it just really makes you feel positive. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I wish I could just say the weather, but I figured you'd take it, right? I also enjoyed the weather today. Well, I visited almost every elementary school in Scred this morning, dropping off second step SEL curriculum materials that we were able to buy because of our SEL grant from MDE,
Yay!
Which was just so awesome. And it's really exciting to see schools better equipped to support their kiddos. So it's great.
It is such good news.
Awesome.
Yeah, it barely fit in my car. A lot of stuff.
I was thinking when I looked at that picture that your car's pretty little.
Yeah, we had to play Tetris.
And I can finish this off. Rye organized such a sweet surprise for me on Monday. She had the services coordinators do this little birthday surprise when we started our meeting, and it was super cute. I did not see it coming at all, and it was, I don't know, it made me cry. Super cute. I really appreciate you, Rye.
Aw, thanks, Court.
Right, I did a lot of scheming to try and make sure you wouldn't see it coming.
So cute.
It was a little bit stressful, Court.
Well, I'm glad you did it.
We're going to shift into our main topic, which is pre-correction prompts. And I gave some of this away in the intro, but pre-correction prompts are short little cues that we give students just before making a transition. They allow us to prevent a lot of behavior problems by getting ahead of them.
Yeah, and in our episode last week about school rules, we mentioned that our rules can't just live on a piece of paper that hangs on the wall. They have to be communicated in order in order for us to get any benefit from them. So part of that communication is planned time, where we pause and we explicitly walk students through the rules or expectations in detail. So for example, picture the set aside time at the beginning of the school year where we should be walking students through our classroom expectations and giving detailed look-fors.
But really, if we just do that, our rules aren't going to accomplish much of anything. I've been in schools where we've got these PBIS expectations that our teachers came up with. We've got great materials for explicitly walking students through those expectations, and we've even got a schedule for doing that together, all in sync with each other. Even when all of that is in place, that's still just an event at one point or a couple points in the school year. And again, if we aren't communicating about the rules day to day and using them proactively to prevent problems, we're missing out on some of the major benefits that make our lives easier and give us more time for instruction and real learning to occur.
Yeah, and we've used that word prevention a few times, and that's kind of what this prompting is all about, and that's why these are also called preventative prompts.
Yeah, I really don't like that phrase pre-correction, actually, because it sounds like the correction is definitely happening, and this pre-correction is just something that comes right before it. That's not the case at all here. In fact, we're trying to set our students up to succeed, to meet our expectations, so we have to waste less time correcting and reacting. We're only calling them pre-correction prompts in this episode because it's by far the most popular term out there, and we want you to be able to recognize it. But really, I much prefer the term preventive prompts. But setting students up to succeed is a phrase that I just used, and that connects to the title of the episode, Our Alley-Oop. Now, I don't really know anything about basketball, but I believe that an alley-oop is when one player tosses the ball up right in front of the net, and then another player grabs it out of the air and dunks it into the hoop. And that is a great visual analogy for what teachers are doing with pre-correction. We're doing our part to give each student a premier opportunity to meet our expectations.
Well, and obviously we want them to meet our expectations because we want those orderly, calm classrooms where we're spending little or no time correcting and managing the disruptive behavior. And instead, we're engaging our students in really meaningful learning experiences. That's what our primary goal is, and seeing students learn the content that we are passionate about.
And that brings me to a point I wanted to make about why a teacher might not be chomping at the bit to do pre-correction. And I actually picked this up from a great episode on another podcast that I was listening to while I was walking my dog. It was a principal from an international school in Norway, and he was talking about how important pre-correction is in their school. And he said a couple of things that stood out to me. Number one, he was saying that some teachers he's talked to would say, my students already know what I'm expecting. If they don't meet that bar, then I've got to step in with correction and discipline, and that's all I need to really concern myself with. And he said that as a teacher himself, he'd operated with that assumption. My kids already know what I'm expecting. But he came to realize that it's a faulty assumption. It's not true. Kids aren't always clear on where the line is for their behavior. And even if they do know that line sometimes and they could explain it to you, it's not often at the forefront of their minds when it really counts. And if we're operating on that assumption that, they've got it, if they mess up, I just have to step in and discipline, we're going to be spending, to Rye's point, a lot more time correcting and disciplining, and that's exactly what the research shows. And that's not how we want to be spending our time in classrooms. It's not fun to constantly be in that reactive, correcting, disciplining zone. The other thing that the principal said that stood out to me is, he was saying many teachers have been misled because they've been told the only thing you have to concern yourself with is planning an amazing lesson. If your lesson is absolutely amazing, you won't have to concern yourself with classroom management at all. And for one thing, that's not true. An engaging lesson is probably our most important tool for preventing misbehavior because it gets kids intrinsically motivated to follow along with us. But it's not our only tool. So it is incredibly important, but it can't replace everything else. We need to be confident in our other tools for preventing misbehavior, and pre-correction is a hugely important one of those other tools that we need to have in our toolbox. We've all had lessons that we spent a lot of time planning, and we assumed that kids would see it as just as amazing as we thought it would be. And we thought they'd be really into it, and they'd be engaged, and we won't have any classroom management issues. And that doesn't always play out the way that we expect. So lesson plans and having an amazing lesson in mind really can't be our only tool in our toolbox. Pre-correction and other things need to be in that toolbox.
Right on. So with that, I think we've done plenty to set up the context and the importance of pre-correction. Let's dive into what pre-correction looks like and how to do it. Take a moment, think about all the transitions that happen in your classroom. So kids are talking to each other as they walk in, and then you have to grab their attention and start whole group instruction. You might stop talking and open it up to whole group discussion. You might play a video. You might have students start working individually at their desk. You might have the class break into small groups. You might have those small groups start sharing their results with the whole group one by one. You get the idea. Next, take any of those activities that you're transitioning into and think about the rules that you have that apply to it. For example, what voice tone the students are supposed to use, if they're supposed to be polite and kind to each other, if they're supposed to raise their hand and be called on before talking. Think about the applicable rules. You're not going to go over all of those rules, probably. I mean, that would take a lot of time. We're talking about tiny, short prompts here. So in most cases, we're just thinking about the thing that's most likely to go wrong, and we're prompting to get ahead of that.
So in my case, the most common one I remember using personally was around voice volume. So for example, before whole group instruction, I might have said something like, all right, I'm excited to tell you guys what we're doing today. I need you to keep your voices at a 0 and listen carefully, and just raise your hands if you have something to say. And in that example, I used a 0 because we had a building-wide system with numbers for different voice volumes. And side note, highly recommend that. Very helpful once you get the hang of it. Anyway, another example would be I'm breaking into small groups and I'd say, while you're working with your partner, remember to keep your voices at a 2, a soft voice, and raise your hands if you'd like my help.
So those examples were referencing Nick's class rules, especially about voice volume and raising hands, but you can also reference routines that you've set up. So for example, before students begin using their Chromebooks for research, you could say, remember, we need to stay on task and use appropriate sites. Today we're only using Britannica.
Another thing to point out is that all of the examples we've given so far have been the instructor telling students what the expectation is. I think we all know that students aren't hanging on our every word and that they're more likely to listen to a peer versus us. So another version is just asking the class what the expectations are.
We did this a few times in our episode last week when we were talking about classroom rules and specifically about PBIS. So say that you're a PBIS school and your expectations are safe, respectful, and responsible. Before you head out into the hallway, you might say, who can tell me how we're going to be respectful in the hallway? So again, I'm just asking the question to the students and soliciting input from them instead of just telling them what the expectation is. And then they get to listen to a peer respond. And we had PBIS at the special education behavior school that I talked about in the intro, the one I worked at. And I use this type of question to students all the time. And the fun part is, if you've got a poster with your PBIS expectations, your classroom rules on it hanging in the classroom, you can ask like, hey, how are we going to be respectful during group work? And then you can kind of like wink and point to the poster because, the answers are all right there if any students need a refresher. And then they would kind of like look at it and then come up with ideas if they couldn't think of it on their own. So it works out really nice. And other ways that this could sound, for example, like who can tell me where our voices should be while we're working with our groups? Or who can tell me what we should do if we have a question while the video is playing? So you get the idea. The idea is just asking the students so that they can hear the expectations come from their peers, who they're going to pay probably more attention to than they would my voice as the teacher.
Yeah, for that routine example we gave earlier where students are researching on Chromebooks, instead of telling, you could ask them, what websites are we supposed to use for research? Yes, Kelly, Britannica.
So I hope we've given you enough examples here to get an idea of how pre-correction works. It's not complicated. Again, think of transition points and give the students a quick cue about a rule or a routine expectation that you want to be at the forefront of their minds. And another benefit that we haven't yet talked about with this is that it makes it so much easier to correct students when we need to.
Yeah, and circling back to that point that the Norwegian principal made about assuming that our kids know what the expectations are and then jumping in to correct when they screw up, if that's your MO, like the only thing that you do, from the student's perspective, it can definitely feel like a gotcha environment. So think about, just for example, if you had a boss who never gave you reminders about their expectations, never gave cues before meetings or presentations about what they were expecting, and then if you broke a protocol, they just jumped on you. It's going to tax your relationship with that authority figure, and it's really similar for kids.
And you might be thinking, come on, I've been in situations where a student definitely knew what I was expecting and they still broke the rules. And yeah, we all have too. Absolutely. Kids are going to test limits. They're going to screw up. But part of the point here is that if we're reliably pre-correcting, we're communicating to that kiddo through our actions that we want to help them be on the right track and be successful in our classroom.
Yeah, Courtney, but it's not like our corrective interactions are all going to be so perfectly chill because we pre-corrected, but in my experience, they're definitely better. And I heard the same thing from the Norwegian principal when he was talking about his school. So if I just reminded the student just a minute ago what voice volume I'm expecting, and then they raise their voice above that level, if I have to talk to them about it, it's going to go better than if I hadn't pre-corrected. I might not even, because I pre-corrected, I might not even have to talk to them. Because that expectation is so fresh in both of our minds, I can often get away with less intensive prompts. Like I could use the look, or I could gesture to the poster with our rules on it. And those are less intense prompts and also less taxing on our relationship. So it helps keep their screw up smaller and it gets them back on track easier without blowing up that relationship.
So at this point in the episode, we hope you're loving the idea of pre-correction and you want to use it more. So how do you do that?
Again, coming back to my Norwegian principal friend, I like the advice that he offered. The K.I.S.S, keep it simple, stupid acronym is what he mentioned. And what he meant by that is that you should start with what's most simple and easy. So like pick one transition that you know you make often during your classes and pick one expectation, like voice volume, that you see problems with and you want to remind your students of. So just start by trying to pre-correct in that one situation consistently every time or most of the time. And from there, you can definitely expand out. And the idea, again, is to make this a habit, something that you're not really even thinking about. It's just unconsciously something you do. It's almost second nature. So we're going to talk takeaways and wrap this up, even though I'm sad, that this episode is ending because it's one of my favorite topics. In our intro, though, we talked about...
More good topics to come.
More good topics to come. We talked about classroom management strategies that give us a lot of bang for our buck. They're high impact, and pre-correction is the poster child for that. It's simple, it's quick, it's something that anybody can pull off, whereas writing an amazing, engaging lesson plan can take years to master and to pull off consistently. And like an alley-oop in basketball, we're setting our students up to succeed by cueing them about an expectation during a transition, right before that expectation becomes relevant and important. And by doing this, we're preventing problems, and we then spend less of our time reactively correcting, which is, again, not a fun place to be all the time. Even when we do have to correct, though, because it's going to happen, pre-correction helps make that go more smoothly because of the effort we just put in to, alley-oop and help the kiddo be set up to succeed. And lastly, again, we recommend that you K.I.S.S and just start small. So pick a single common transition point in your classroom and a single expectation, like voice volume, and then build out from there, gradually forming this habit that becomes second nature to you.
So thanks for spending time with us today. Make sure to subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, click the bell so that you're notified when new episodes are released each week. We'll see you when you come back for another Slice of SEL.
Thanks, guys. Bye.